Hi everyone, welcome to the visual guide for the Minstrel's Ballad, Tsukuyomi's Pain. This is the brand new Extreme Primal made available by patch 4.3 in Final Fantasy XIV, Under the Moonlight. My name is Ms. Tech and I'll be your Primal guide. We begin with REPRIMAND. Similar to normal mode, this is a raid-wide AoE blast that should be healed through. up next, we face our first Nightfall. On Extreme mode, the two possible Nightfall attacks have no telegraphs. Instead, players will predict the incoming attack by the type of weapon the boss forms. If she forms a staff, players will need to position themselves for Steel of the Underworld. This attack will target a tank, then a damage dealer, and then finally a healer. Getting hit by more than one of these will easily kill you. To handle this, we have both tanks stand in front of the boss, all damage dealers on one flank, and both healers on the other flank. This ensures that all 3 hits of Steel of the Underworld are sufficiently spread apart to avoid double cleaving any one player. If she pulls out a gun, all players will need to stack or line up for Lead of the Underworld to share the incoming damage. Here, the boss will cast Nightfall twice in a row. The first attack is random, and the second is the other of the 2 options. Next, healers will need to heal through another Reprimand cast. Immediately after, the boss will move into the center and cast NIGHTBLOOM. This will do raid-wide damage, stun all players for 15 seconds, and transition the fight into the add phase. This mode is essentially identical to normal mode. Players will need to quickly dispose of each wave of adds before the suffering meter reaches 100. When the Spectre of Xenos spawns, players will be knocked back and stunned for another 10 seconds. Healers will need to top the raid off after each Dispersivity blast, while everyone else destroys them as quickly as possible. Once all of the adds are down, heal through the NIGHTBLOOM ultimate and prepare for the next phase. Enmity does reset here, so tanks be ready to grab the boss as soon as she becomes active. This phase begins with Supreme Selenomancy. This will divide the platform into the 2 sections, White Moonlight and Dark Twilight. It will also place a 4-stack of either Moonlit or Moonshadowed on all players. Since a 5-stack will afflict you with a bleed, doom, and result in your inevitable death, all players must be ready to immediately move to the opposite platform to instantly refresh their stacks. Moonlight orbs will also spawn on one side of the platform, covering the area with large lunar halo donut AoEs. Players that need this side to refresh their stacks will need to stand under the orbs to avoid the attack at the same time. Immediately after, the platform division will change, resulting in one of the colors growing and eventually eclipsing the other. To aid my explanation, I'll be calling the growing color the big color and the disappearing crescent side the small color. Since the small color will eventually disappear, the difficulty of this phase comes in balancing your debuff stacks and resetting at the proper times to ensure you have enough time to survive when there is only one color on the platform. This can seem pretty daunting, but each tick of the debuff and the incoming mechanics, including the rate at which the small color disappears, all line up nicely together, so let's break it down slowly. Once players have reset their initial 4-stack and the lunar halos explode, the first platform transition begins, creating a small color crescent. The tank can pull the boss to the edge of the crescent, allowing players the opportunity to step into either color to reset their debuff while maintaining uptime on the boss. The boss will then cast Nightfall, which during this first moon phase will always be followed by Lead of the Underworld. Players will need to stack either behind or in front of the boss to share the damage. Immediately after, the off-tank, 1 healer, and 1 damage dealer will be marked for a meteor with these large markers. These markers must be dropped far enough away from each other, otherwise they will explode, dealing high damage and applying a damage down debuffs on everyone. These meteors will also eventually explode into massive AoE circles, so the group must carefully control where they're dropped to allow the formation of a safe zone. Furthermore, depending on what color side the meteor is dropped on, the resultant meteor will either be black or white. This is extremely important for later on in the phase, so keep this in mind. Now, there are all sorts of ways to do this, and I've seen every variation of Party Finder strat, but in this video I'll be focusing on a strat that I've found has the least potential for error and allows for some great damage uptime. However, no matter what strat you end up using for this phase, the basic principles are the same. For this strat, meteor placements are all relative to the boss and ensure that all players have the same opportunity to position themselves in time to ensure proper stack resets. To aid meteor placements, we set up waymarks a bit like this. Utilizing the same flanks players are already comfortable with from the Nightfall spread attack, we have the healers move their meteor to the waymark closest to their flank, while the damage dealers drop their meteor on the waymark closest to their flank. The off-tank will be dropping their meteor off directly behind the boss, opposite the small color crescent area. These meteor placements will ensure that there is always a meteor placed in the small color. This is incredibly important because without this different colored meteor, players will have no way to reset their debuffs once the small color disappears. After spreading to their appropriate waymarks, large AoE circles will form on the ground, signifying the meteors dropping down. At this point, all players need to immediately collapse into the safe zone inside the small color crescent created by this formation. Players will have one last opportunity here to reset their stack to the small color before it disappears, so it is absolutely imperative that all players move into this area as soon as possible. If you fail to reset at this time, you will probably die. Once the platform is one color, the boss will either gain a full moon or new moon buff. This will come into play near the end of the phase. Immediately after, 2 Moonlight orbs will spawn in the same area, and players will need to quickly dip under one of them to dodge the incoming lunar halo AoEs. As these resolve, a third single Moonlight orb will spawn in between them, and players will need to be ready to move into this area to dodge the next lunar halo AoE. While doing this, the 3 meteors on the platform will explode into massive AoE circles. Players dodging the lunar halo will also need to make sure they're not getting clipped by any meteor explosions. Once each meteor explodes, they will leave behind a puddle of the same color. This is why it's very important that there is always at least one meteor that is dropped into the small color, so the appropriate color puddle forms. As soon as the meteors explode and the donut AoE resolves, all players can quickly make their way to the meteor puddle to refresh their stack one last time. At this point, the boss will either cast Paraloon or Anti-Twilight, depending on the color of the platform and her buff, dealing raid-wide damage to players and resetting the platform. Players should stay in the meteor puddle during this cast or they will die. At this point, the main tank can reposition in the middle. Healers will have another reprimand to heal through, followed by the first set of Zashiki Asobi fans. This first pattern of fans will cover 2/3 of the platform first, leaving 1/3 free. Players will need to quickly move into the free side. Immediately after, this free third will also be covered by another 3 fans, while the first set begins to explode. Wait for the initial explosion and then run into the safe zone to get away from the second explosion. While these explosions are happening, the boss will cast Nightfall. Handle this in the same manner as before. Next up, Torment onto Death will target the primary tank. This will do high damage and place a magic vulnerability up debuff on the affected tank, forcing a tank swap. Make sure you cool down and heal through this as necessary. Immediately after, another Supreme Selenomancy phase will begin. Players need to quickly identify their debuff color and move appropriately to reset their stacks immediately. Be sure to dodge the Lunar Halo AoEs as necessary. The platform will begin to change and players can reset their stacks while waiting for Nightfall. This Nightfall will be a Steel of the Underworld triple attack. Players will need to position themselves in the same manner as the first phase to ensure no overlap. As soon as the attack begins, the 3 marked players will need to run to their assigned spots to drop off their meteors. As the meteors drop down, all players will of course run into the small color to ensure they get the last tick necessary before the color disappears. This movement is the same as before. Move under an orb to dodge the first set of donut attacks, and then move into the third orb to spawn, taking care not to get clipped by the exploding meteor AoEs. As soon as the meteors explode, all players will run into the puddle to refresh their stack. The boss will again cast either Anti-Twilight or Paraloon, deal raid-wide damage, remove all debuffs, and reset the platform. Make sure you stay inside that puddle until the cast resolves. At this point, the boss will cast Dance of the Dead, signifying the last phase change. In this phase, players will need to be on the lookout for what kind of moonlight infuses the boss. The options are either full moon, signified by this large white orb and a white moon on her back, or new moon, signified by a large dark orb and a black moon on her back. It's important for all players to recognize this infusion, since it determines what kind of attack will be accompanying her incoming blade attacks. Full moon will cast a point-blank AoE attack. New moon will cast a massive donut attack, where the only safe zone is near her hitbox. Immediately after, the boss will cast either Bright Blade or Dark Blade. Bright Blade is a massive cleave on her left, and players will need to move to her right side to avoid it. Dark Blade is a massive cleave on her right, and players will need to move to her left side to avoid it. As you move to dodge these blades, players must also ensure they're also moving appropriately to dodge the full or new moon attacks. In this example, we have a full moon Bright Blade, meaning players need to move to her right and ensure that they are out of melee range. In this example, we have a new moon Dark Blade, meaning players need to move to her left for the blade and stay very close to her hitbox. You can have either variation of moon and blade attacks, so make sure you keep your eyes open and dodge appropriately. Next up, another reprimand to heal through, followed by a set of dancing fans. This is the same circle pattern you've seen in normal mode, and players need to stand in the last fan to spawn before moving into the center center to dodge the explosions. At the same time, the boss will be infused by another full moon, meaning players will need to stay out of melee range. Lunacy will also target a player to stack up. To handle all of these mechanics at once, players simply run to the last fan to spawn. The center fan explosion coincides with the full moon point blank AoE attack and the first Lunacy hit. As soon as the center fan explodes, players will run into the center and remain stacked for the remainder of the Lunacy hits. Another blade attack is next, and players will need to move to the appropriate side and move in and out of melee to dodge the moon attack at the same time. Next step will be another tank buster and tank swap. Remember to cooldown and heal through this as necessary. Next, another set of dancing fans will plop down on 2/3 of the platform. Players will need to move to the safe zone. In this phase, this fan pattern also coincides with a new mechanic called Hagetsu. This will target one tank, one damage dealer, and one healer with a marker before blasting them for damage. These players will need to spread away from one another to avoid overlap. As soon as the first set of fans explode, players can move in to avoid the second set explosion. The players marked for Hagetsu should make sure to spread until their attacks resolve. Another blade attack with the moon combo into 2 more reprimands. At this point, you've seen all the mechanic combos of the last phase, and these mechanics will repeat until the boss is down. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. As always, thanks for watching. Till next time.